Good morning. It's great to be with you. My name is Manuel Pastor. I'm the token Southern Californian here. Many of you will want to send me back, I'm sure, but it's very exciting to be with you. I was asked today to speak about some work we've done looking at disparities in the Bay Area, and I was asked to talk about demography, economic inequality, and the future of the Bay. I was asked also to document the disparities, suggest solutions, and inspire hope. As if that was not enough, I was asked to provide an in-depth analysis of gentrification, including how long you'd be able to stay in your particular neighborhood. There was a desire to make sure that I connect all of this to the question of art, including a discussion of postmodern approaches to representations of Pope Francis and his soon-to-come embrace of the transgendered community. And then finally, I was also asked to talk and offer some reflections on the electoral season, including whether or not Donald Trump and Ben Carson would team up to have one ticket that would have their central demand, which is deep suspicion of Mexican Muslim providers of women's health care. That's a lot to talk about in a short keynote, or what we in Spanish call a Keynote Detail. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. Let me bring up the first slide. But I'll try to actually, believe it or not, connect this to art, and I'll explain why toward the end. So I'm going to get started. Before I get started, I always like to let audiences know, some of you who know me know this, that while I'm speaking, my voice might break a little bit or get a little bit ragged. You might think that it's because I'm emotional being in the Bay Area. Used to live in Santa Cruz, bond with y'all. Well, I am emotional, but it's not that. I actually have a speech disorder that's called spasmodic dysphonia, spasms around the voice box. It's what Diane Rehm has on NPR. Bobby Kennedy Jr. has it, now me. And I always like to reassure people, don't worry, it gets treated once a month, believe it or not, with Botox, because that's how we treat everything in Los Angeles. So it works really well for us. So there's sort of, three big themes that I think are animating what's going on nationwide, and they are sort of telescoped here in the Bay Area as well. One, of course, is rapid demographic change. This shows you the demographic change in the nation as a whole between in the 80s, the 90s, and the aughts. You can see that between 2000 and 2010, the Latino population grew by 43% nationwide. By 43%, the Asian Pacific Islander population, 11% for the African American population, and only 1% for the non-Hispanic white population. Part of what's going on in this national election, of course, is that changing face of America and the anxiety that's provoking amongst an older electorate. So one big theme for the nation as a whole is rapid demographic change. Another big theme for the nation as a whole is dramatic increases in inequality. You can see here a chart taken from Emmanuel Sais of UC Berkeley, which looks at the share of income going to the top 1%. That's the blue line. You can see that in the long sweep of the 20th century, there's only two times where it really peaks. 1928, the year before the Great Depression, 2007, the year before the Great Recession. Coincidence? I don't think so. So we'll get to that in a minute, but we've got this huge problem of inequality in the United States, and it's a problem of inequality with income share going to the top 1%, but also the fact that those who are at the sort of 80th and 90th percentile of the income distribution have also seen their wages go up, while, as you'll see in a minute, wages for those at the bottom have fallen. The third sort of big national trend is increasing spatial separation. What this chart shows you is the share of poor people on the bottom living in poor neighborhoods, the share of affluent people living in affluent neighborhoods on the top of those bars. And you'll note that as we move from 1970 to 1980, 1990, 2000, 2009, there's increased spatial sorting. That is, people are increasingly income segregated and sort of not encountering each other in daily life. And that winds up feeding into the political polarization that's going on in the country as well. Well, what does this look like nationwide and then coming on down to California? So nationwide, what it means is that by the year 2043, 2044, the nation, I think somebody used the term that California is already majority minority. I don't like that term. I think that we will become all minority all the time, right? Every group will be a minority by the year 2042, 2043. The majority of the workforce will be people of color by about the year 2031, 2032. The majority of youth will be people of color by about the end of this next decade in the United States as a whole. The majority of births have been to people of color for the last 2 to 3 years. America is changing, and it's changing not so much because of immigration, because immigration into the country has slowed down. It's changing because of the births, the sons and daughters of those immigrants. Now, we've been here before. This is what the United States is going through between 2000 and 2040. 69% non-Hispanic white in 2000, 50% non-Hispanic white in 2040. That is basically what California went through between 1980 and 2000. California is America fast forward. And the Bay Area and Los Angeles, America on steroids. LA, actually America on Botox, but nonetheless. And so these are big and dramatic changes which do lead to this kind of sense of discomfort. I mean, I still recall the exact day that California became majority people of color. It was a demographer who had predicted that that was the day. It was December 15th, 1999. And so I kept getting phone calls from reporters all day long going, we're majority minority, we're majority minority, we're majority minority, what's it mean? Definitely anxiety in their voice. And finally, like any honest academic, I said, I don't know. But we're having a salsa party tonight in my house to celebrate. In the spirit of the new California, everyone's invited. They just need to learn a new step. Now, how many of you have gone salsa dancing? And how many of you took that class before so you don't embarrass the crap out of yourself? Right? What we're doing is going through a process of learning. What does it mean when leadership is coming from different communities? What does it mean to lead in different communities? What's it mean to adjust to the diversity that is the Bay, to the diversity that is California? And one of the things that's sort of interesting about this is when people see these changes, in particular between 1980 and 2010, what they imagine looking at that, particularly the growth of the Latino community, is that that's going to just kind of continue forward indefinitely, that eventually California will become 150% Latino, right? Super Latinos, right? Marchando por la tierra, right? La reconquista está aquí, Aslani que, you know. I know only a little of you got that, but it was pretty nationalist. So what's interesting is that demographic change is actually slowing down in California. We are actually kind of cruising into almost a finish line in terms of our sort of demographic stability. In fact, interesting demographic fact, because if you know demographic facts and relate them at cocktail parties, you'll be very popular. The only large metropolitan area in the United States that in the last 10 years did not see an increase in the number of Hispanic children, Los Angeles. Because it's an older Latino population, more homegrown, the immigrants have been there for a longer time. About 60% of the undocumented immigrants have been there for 10 years. They're moving into fertility patterns that mimic those of the United States. So we are actually seeing demographic slowdown in terms of this change. But it is happening on the youth side. Next slide. And interestingly, it's happening all over California. So this is a map of California in 1980. It's an easy map to interpret. The browner the county, the browner the county. So you'll note that in 1980, the only county that was actually majority people of color was Imperial County, right on the border with Mexico. But even Los Angeles had not yet made that turn. By the year 2010, this is what California looks like, big demographic changes. And by the year 2040, this is what California looks like. And it raises some interesting questions. First, a lot of that demographic change is going to be occurring in inland California, and it's a thing that those of us on the coast often pay little attention to. The second thing it raises is, what the heck is up with Sierra, right? I mean, get with the program. So huge demographic change. And in the context of the demographic change, in the context of another phenomenon which is fascinating, which is the fact that just as California has been America fast forward demographically, California has been America fast forward in terms of the inequality. So this is the share of the income going to the top 1%. You'll note that between 1920 and 1980, for California, that was below the national average, but from 1990 forward, California is above the national average. Here's another really interesting set of statistics. As you might guess, I like statistics. So this is a measure that's called the Gini coefficient. It's a measure of inequality. And these are the states of the United States arrayed by which states are the most unequal compared to the states that are the most equal. You'll note that in 1969, California was essentially in the middle of the pack. It was number 26 out of the 50 states plus DC in terms of its level of inequality. Watch what happens as we move to 1990. The whole bars are going up, but look how California moved forward. This is when Webb said that's 1980. This is 1989. Bars are going up, California is moving forward. This is 1999. This is 2010. And that's the last year for which we have available data. So a steady rise in inequality, really leading the nation. And now California is outpacing such paragons of progressive virtue as Georgia and Mississippi, places we've always looked to as beacons of social justice. So we've got a serious problem, and it is a problem that mirrors the national problem, rapidly changing demographics, or really presages the national problem, rapidly changing demographics, rising income inequality, and the kind of political and social polarization that's resulted. So we've been trying to take a look at these issues also in the Bay Area, and we've been doing a project that we completed, and we continue to do different kinds of this project, which has combined a group many of you know, PolicyLink. PolicyLink brings skills in policy framing, advocacy, research, and communications, and this is a picture of their founder and CEO, Angela Glover-Blackwell, and I'm the director of the USC Program for Environmental Regional Equity, and we bring quantitative skills. We are nerds for social justice. So we're trying to provide a sort of rigorous data infrastructure for the arguments that we make. So we've been looking at this in terms of the Bay Area. Now, when you look at the Bay Area, what's interesting about the Bay Area is that it's ahead of the nation's demographic shift. So it's, like the rest of California, become majority people of color sooner, although later than, for example, Los Angeles, and it'll continue to outpace the rest of the country moving forward. What's driving growth in the Bay Area? Latinos and Asians. Interestingly, for Latinos, most of that growth is actually coming from the US born. 75% of the Latino population in the Bay Area is actually US born, probably homegrown. The Asian population is actually far more immigrant. But what you can see is that there's a shrinkage in both the white population and a shrinkage in the African American population, reflecting all of the gentrification pressures that so many of you are thinking about, worrying about, and fighting against. The other thing that's very interesting about the Bay Area, and this is something that's occurring all over the United States, is that the diversity now is actually occurring not so much in a San Francisco or in an Oakland, but in the region's suburbs. And that's actually typical all over the nation. Many of you, when Ferguson happened over a year ago, your first thought, and it probably should have been, was what a act of police brutality and what a reason to understand why Black lives don't matter to the systems that govern communities. For someone like me, what I realized was that's an inner ring suburb, right? It was a place that went from being 75% white to being 75% people of color over 20 years. And it joins a major population center, St. Louis, partly because of that big demographic change. Its governing institutions are deeply out of touch with the new population, and they essentially became a set of institutions that preyed on that population through fines, through arrests, etc. And that problem of a mismatch between the changing demography and our suburban institutions, which often lack civic infrastructure, social services infrastructure, community organizing infrastructure, it's a big problem in the United States. It's a big problem in the Bay Area as well. Suburbs need to be organized. And you can see this by looking at the demographic change that's actually happened in so many of the suburbs. What is fascinating, though, is looking forward. You can see a couple things about this. This is 1980, 2010, and 2040. First, there'll continue to be increasing diversity. Marin will continue to lag. And San Francisco is projected to get whiter. Projected to get whiter and have a lot more dogs. But definitely projected to get whiter. And what's driving that? It is, of course, the issue of gentrification, something we'll talk to in a minute. There's also something about the Bay Area that I think is very important to realize that the data tell us. And it is that the famous economic machine in the Bay Area is not only leaving a lot of people aside, it's not as productive as you might think. This shows you cumulative growth in regional product. That is how much wealth is being generated. And the green line, that's on the right-hand side, is the Bay Area. The purple line is the United States. And it is true that the Bay Area has been outproducing the United States in terms of the generation of income and wealth. But if you look on the left-hand side, job growth, the Bay Area is underproducing relative to the nation jobs. That is, incomes are on the rise, but jobs have actually been not rising as rapidly, and it's one of the things that's leaving so many working people out. You can see as well what's happened to income distribution. These are different sort of what are called deciles of the wage earning profile. So 90th percentile means 10% of the people earn more, 90% less. 50th, that's the median, the person in the middle. The 10th percentile, 10% of the people earn less, 90% of the people earn more. The purple bars are the United States, and you can see that aside from the share of income going to the top 1%, which has a lot to do with sort of financialization, tax structures, et cetera, that you can also see that for those at the 90th percentile, they've had a pretty big increase in their income nationwide compared to the drops for those who are in the middle and those who are at the 10th percentile. In the Bay Area, sharp increases at the top, small increases in the middle, declines for those at the 20th and 10th percentile. So the gap is widening in the Bay Area faster than in the rest of the country. And jobs that might have been considered middle wage jobs, those jobs are disappearing in the Bay Area. Used to be, there were lots of manufacturing jobs, for example, in Santa Clara County. Those are going away. So the Bay Area is now 14th of the 150 top metropolitan areas in the United States in terms of income inequality. And it's probably going to have challenges moving forward. This shows you the share of each group that actually has at least an AA degree, meaning they're qualified for the jobs that will be generated. The purple shows you the jobs that are going to require at least an AA degree. 43% of the new jobs. You can see that whites, US-born API, Asian Pacific Islanders, and immigrant Pacific Islanders fit into those jobs, but those who don't have the sufficient education to fit into the jobs that are going to be generated, African Americans, US-born Latinos, immigrant Latinos, and the Native American population. This is a recipe for growing inequality by race. And as important as it is to make sure that the schools address the question of representation, and that's critical for people to see themselves in what's being taught, it is also critical for those schools to be preparing people to be able to get into the workforce. And it's critical to have a policing system that does not over-incarcerate and permanently force people out of the labor market through marking them with a criminal justice record. And it's critical to make sure that immigrants have an opportunity to move into the jobs of the future as well if we're to see equity in the Bay Area. So what I'm going to do is jump a little bit over this because I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure that I have a roaring and emotional conclusion with you. So if we go back, so gentrification is a very important issue in the Bay Area. It's a reflective of very systemic conditions having to do with structural racism, concentration of poverty, et cetera. What's interesting is that those structural conditions tend to be pretty persistent. And what they can do is either produce a Detroit if there are drivers of decline, like deindustrialization, disinvestment, and white flight, or they can produce gentrification if you've got a different set of drivers. And in the Bay Area and in other places like Seattle, where I was earlier this week, the drivers are the widening income gap, which sort of leads to screwy housing markets, the high-tech and innovation economy, which drags in people who have a lot of money, the fact that there's reinvestment in this urban core, and the criminalization of the poor and people of color, which forces people out. And really what all of this winds up amounting to is essentially an imbalance of power. That slide became a little bit animated on its own, sort of the words moved in different directions. But I think the thing to realize, and I think the thing that's really fundamental, is that gentrification is fundamentally about power. Because if communities had the economic power to sustain themselves there, or they had the political power to change the policies that are producing gentrification in their communities, then the improvements would not be displacement, they would be investment. So if we want to address gentrification, one of the fundamental things that we need to do is to raise the power of marginalized communities to be able to participate in the political process, to be able to gain assets, to be able to participate economically, and that's fundamentally what changes this situation. So I'm going to jump over a little bit of this. Let's keep on moving because the one thing I will say is that a lot of the ideas that I'm talking to you about are captured in my new book, Equity, Growth, and Community. It will be available at the beginning of next month. It's a really good book. You can buy the book for $25 from Amazon.com or your local bookseller. It's actually, University of California Press is going to release it as a free ebook, which is very hard for me to autograph, but still that would be cool for you to get. And for those of you who are not readers, it's about to be made into a major motion picture in which I was, just came from yesterday negotiating the rights. I was going to be portrayed by Antonio Banderas. I was very excited about that. It turns out it's Carlos Mencia, but still, it's a good thing. So we need to kind of adopt a different vision of how to achieve sustainable diversity, and understanding that is going to be understanding that we need to build power, and that part of that power is building social connections. And here's where I want to wrap in what you're going to be doing. I hope so many of you who came today actually come tomorrow for the arts component as well. Because I think one of the things, by the way, who are those folks? Those are my children. My son is a musician whose backup career is as an actor. My daughter, beautiful, is a dancer. So it's made me think a lot more about arts, and I'll kind of close with that in a second. But one of the things I think is that while at the same time we need to build the power of marginalized communities, we need to close the disconnection between communities. Because when what happens is that you see a community being gentrified and displaced, and you say, that's not my community, it's not my issue, I'm not going to work on that. That emerges because we are disconnected. When you see a set of workers being left behind, when you see immigrants not being able to mainstream their way into the economy or political representation, when you see the over-criminalization of our youth, when you see the bullying or mistreatment of LGBT youth, and you live in a world that doesn't connect you to that experience, then that experience is allowed to go forward. We face a fundamental problem in this country of an imbalance of power and a huge disconnection between each other. And that huge disconnection leads to politics that ignore the consequences for other people. And I think that is one of the fundamental things that art helps us with. Those of us who often think about community development or the economy often think about arts in a very utilitarian way. We say, well, arts, that's good for community development, right? We could use it to build a business district. But arts is really fundamentally about meaning, about connection, about discovery. When my son was heading off to go to theater school at UCLA, we took him on vacation, and my daughter on vacation, to Hawaii. And one evening, as the sun was setting, it was time for my son and I to have an intimate conversation, which meant, since we're men, we weren't looking at each other. And I asked him, Joaquin, you're going to theater school. Why are you going to theater school? What's the fundamental driver? What do you want to do the rest of your life? And it took him only 5 seconds to say, I want to make things of beauty with my friends. It's a beautiful statement. And when you think about what community organizers do, they're trying to make things of beauty with their friends. They're trying to create a beloved community in which everyone belongs. That is a gorgeous and beautiful and precious society. And it can only be made if we make it with our friends. Bay Area Bold is calling you. It's calling you to be more, let me just move to this last slide. Bay Area Bold, back one, is calling you. It's calling you to be thoughtful about the disparities that are occurring in the Bay Area. It's calling for you to be courageous in having the tough conversations around race, around over-incarceration, around displacement that are fundamental to the future of the Bay Area. It's calling for you to be honest with one another. It's calling you to be bold in what the policies are that you'll propose, but also bold in the connections that you'll be making with other people to secure a better future. It's calling you to make things of beauty with your friends. Thank you.